Amen. So St. Patrick did bring Christianity or popularize Christianity in Ireland, and Irish folks were not always Christian, and so I thought we could take some time to explore today how Christianity shaped and inspired different moments in Irish history and perspective. In Paul's letter, the saint encourages us to walk as children of the light, this light of spirit, this light of truth, the light of a God who makes themselves one with the oppressed and struggles for liberation, the light that calls the soul indeed of the oppressor to their true and redeemed humanity through surrendering to the love at the heart of being itself. Indeed, the creative and creating revolutionary love at the heart of all things. The light of the world, this inner light, the soul of the universe. Paul reminds us we can be empowered to conform not to the ways of the world of empire, but to live through and from this inner light, remembering we are its children, called to seek it and see it in ourselves and each other. And so I did recently learn that it's a tradition of the congregation to have a St. Patrick's Day potluck. And so in honor of the holiday that celebrates the patron saint of Ireland, I thought we might take some time to go on a trip through Irish history to explore the ways the Irish people have shown the world what it means to live as children of the light, at least from their perspective, and at least in different moments of history. But first, let's contend with these leprechauns. Leprechauns in Irish folklore, leprechauns are not what I'm about to describe in Irish folklore. They have come to be associated with the same thing in the Irish diaspora. But what in Irish folklore are called the other crowd, or the good people, or the fairies, they came to be reduced in the Irish diaspora as this little chubby drunk character, and they are actually something so much more interesting than the caricature of the leprechaun. The caricature of the leprechaun actually has its origins in English and American newspaper cartoons depicting Irish immigrants who at the time were referred to as white N-words and met with signs in store windows that read, "No dogs or Irish." This was also in the same times when they were fleeing the famine of the 1840s, not because there wasn't anything for them to eat in Ireland, but because the colonizing presence wouldn't allow them to eat. And watched 3 million Gaelic Irish immigrate and another 1 million die of starvation. My grandmother knew her great-grandfather who survived the famine, and she grew up with stories saying the people would be seen on the side of the road with green on their mouths because they were trying to eat grass. That's what it means to wear the green. My grandmother said we survived because the Choctaw Indians sent corn, and that at the end of the famine, the Mother of God appeared to the people on the hills over Cahersiveen. The ones called the fairies, which have come to be known as leprechauns in the diaspora, in Irish folklore are not these leprechauns, but the ones called the Tua de Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and that's what that means in Irish. In the Tuatha Danann in Irish story and folklore and myth and imagination, simultaneously represent mythical ancestors, forces of nature, spirits of the land, embodied in places like the Giant's Causeway, which are the footprints of the great warrior Finn McCool, or the wells, which are the body of the mother Bridget. They're considered to be embodied in sacred places in nature like this, and trees and hills. And we see them represented in the poem Misha Era, I Am Ireland, by Gaelic language and culture preserver, teacher, and rebel Padraig Pearse, in which Era, the goddess of sovereignty and the earth of Ireland herself, speaks and tells her story, saying, Misha Era, Shiname na an chailiach vera. Misha Era, Wegni me na an chailiach vera. Mor maglar, me arug cucullin croga. Mor manar, machlan fein a gyaul amathar. Mor mavran, dea gundram in ar chuiris duchas. Misha Era, Shiname na an chailiach vera. Misha Era, Wegni me na an chailiach vera. I am Ireland. I am older than the hag of Vera. Great my glory. I who bore the brave Cucullin. Great my shame, my own children that sold their mother. Great my pain, my irreconcilable enemies who harass me continually. Great my sorrow, that crowd in whom I placed my trust decayed. I am Ireland. I am lonelier than the hag of Vera, the hag of Vera being the peninsula that juts out on the southwest. And scientists have known that, have figured out that peninsula was once the ocean floor under Cuba. So this hag of Vera character, she really is very old. But in the poetry and in the folklore, we see this understanding of connectedness to spirit and people and place, and spirit imbuing all things, the natural world. And we see this understanding expressed in the indigenous pre-colonial, indeed pre-Christian laws of Gaelic Ireland, which were called the Brehon Laws. Under the Brehon Laws, there was no concept of owning the land, but rather all things were seen as being shared in common, much as how we hear the disciples lived in the Acts of the Apostles. The conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland goes much deeper than religion or a sectarian divide. It actually originates in a clash between a Celtic social system that enshrined communal sharing and relation to lands and the Anglo-Saxon feudal system. For example, under the Brehon codes, land called Cuil Sonorba was set aside for the maintenance of the poor, the old and incapable members of society. Those who had their own plot were expected to pay taxes for the upkeep of the community, paying for the support of the poor, the aged, and the orphans. If someone fell behind in taxes, surviving relatives were not expected to pay the debts. Irish law humanely stated, every dead man kills his liabilities. Even beekeepers were expected to distribute honey among neighbors, since the bees gathered honey off of shared land. As late as 1847, there were parts of Gaelic Ireland where land was tilled, sowed, and reaped in common, and produce divided among workers in accordance with the old ways. And that's why it was convenient to let the Irish people die during the famine for England. These Brehon laws were abolished in Ireland upon the invasion and instituting of the Ulster Plantation by England. It is worth knowing that the Ulster Plantation, which instituted the subjugation of the Irish in Ireland, was constructed in tandem at the same meetings of the London livery companies as the Virginia Plantation, which instituted the enslavement of African peoples on this continent. The same year, the same meetings, the same design, and by design. Nevertheless, the Gaelic understanding of relatedness to the land and sharing all things in common with other humans persisted through time, just like spirit through so many children of light. Of the Irish in the industrial era, Friedrich Engels wrote of this persistent understanding of the people. Property that has only rights and no duties is absolutely beyond the ken of the Irish people. No wonder that so many Irish who are suddenly cast into one of the modern cities of England and America, among a population with entirely different moral and legal standards, despair of all morals and justice, lose all hold and become an easy prey to demoralization. That's Friedrich Engels speaking of the Irish. And indeed, throughout Irish history, inspired by the collective understanding of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Irish rebelled against the plantation system and all subsequent colonizing systems of tyranny and oppression every 30 years for 800 years and ongoing. Throughout the hundreds of years of her history, a profound struggle that has been reduced in popular, we see this profound struggle, which has been reduced in popular understanding to a sectarian divide only because the landowners and landlords were Protestants, and the indigenous Gaelic Irish population were predominantly Catholic. But in resistance to these systems of tyranny, the Irish embody for the world one interpretation of what living as children of the light might look like. For example, those of you who appreciate nonviolent strategy will appreciate knowing that the Irish brought the world the boycott, the term and the practice of the boycott. Charles Parnell, leader of the Irish Land League, was born, and the Land League was born not only to obtain fair rents and fixity of tenure, it developed a philosophy to overthrow landlordism in Ireland. And in the hopes of devising what Parnell called, the leader of the Land League called, a more Christian and charitable way of resisting the landlords, as opposed to putting them on pitchforks, not so Christian. He stated, when a man takes a farm from which another has been evicted, you must show him on the roadside. When you meet him, you must show him in the streets of the town. You must show him off in the fair and the marketplace, and even in places of worship, by leaving him severely alone, putting him into a kind of moral coventry, isolating him from his kind like the leper of old. You must show him your detestation of the crime he has committed. And you may depend upon it that there is no man full of avarice, so lost to shame, as to dare the public opinion of all right-thinking people and to transgress your unwritten code of laws. The Irish Land League applied this treatment to one particular landlord by the name of Captain Boycott, whose servants left with all the estate's farm laborers. I guess maybe they went to the pub. Until Captain Boycott had to leave and go back to England. And so now we have the term and the practice boycott, which has its roots in the efforts of the Irish people to be good Christians. Let us hear this morning the words of the great Irish abolitionist, Daniel O'Connell, my grandmother's grandmother's cousin, the one who in Irish history is called Daniel O'Connell the Liberator. He is called Daniel O'Connell the Liberator for getting Catholics the right to vote, and he was the first Irish Catholic to sit in Parliament while Ireland was still under British occupation, while the 26 counties were still under British occupation. During the abolitionist era, he called out to Irish people in the United States, this great abolitionist, Cousin Dan. There is nothing politically right that is morally wrong. Ireland and Irish people should be foremost in seeking to effect the emancipation of all humanity. America alleges that they did not perpetrate the crime of slavery, but inherited it from England. This, however, fact as it is, remains a paltry apology for America, who, asserting liberty for herself, still uses the brand and the lash against others. Liberty in America only means the power to flog slaves and work them for nothing. Over the broad Atlantic, we pour forth our voices. To you, Irish in America, saying to you all, come out of such a land, you Irish people, or if you remain and dare countenance this system of slavery that is supported there, we will recognize you as Irish no longer. Throughout Irish history, the Irish people have understood living as children of the light as this kind of resistance to tyranny. And so we also see this understanding reflected years later, about 100 years after Daniel O'Connell, in the Irish People's Association of the uprising of the people against colonial occupation with the resurrection of Christ, indeed, in the declaration of the Easter Rebellion of 1916, which on Easter Sunday declared to the world, Irishmen and Irish women, in the name of God and of the dead generations past from which she receives her ancient tradition of nationhood, Ireland, through us, summons her children to her flag and strikes for her freedom. And we see that same struggle, that ancient struggle, carry throughout history, a struggle that continues through this day. In more modern times, we heard a similar echo of Daniel O'Connell's charge to Irish Americans in the comments of Bernadette Devlin, who in the 1970s, inspired by the Christian ethics and practice of the African American civil rights movement, organized in Belfast the People's March for Justice and Freedom. This was an effort to get Irish Catholics in the 6 northern counties that remain colonized by England the right to vote, where they continued to be denied that right at the time. Of course, it was illegal to deny someone the right to vote based on their religion. So the way the Anglo presence in the North got around that was by saying only ratepayers could vote. And of course, Irish Catholics were too poor to pay any rates, so they couldn't vote. So the objective of the People's March for Justice and Freedom, which was inspired by the civil rights movement, was a one-person, one-vote policy. Anyhow, Bernadette Devlin visited the United States during that time period, and she echoes the similar sentiments of Daniel O'Connell to the Irish Americans. So let's hear Bernadette. My people, the people who knew about oppression, discrimination, prejudice, poverty, and the frustration and despair that they produce, were not Irish Americans. They were black, they were Puerto Ricans, they were Chicanos, and those who were supposed to be my people, the Irish Americans who knew about English misrule and the famine and supported the civil rights movement at home and knew that partition and England were the cause of these problems, they looked and sounded to me like the British back home. They said exactly the same things about black people that the loyalists said about us at home. In New York, I was given the key to the city by the mayor, an honor not to be sneezed at. I gave it to the Black Panthers. And so, friends, Irish or not, if we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, let us remember what it really means to wear the green, and remember the unique ways the Irish have shown the world what it means to be a Christian, thanks to good old St. Patrick. And so in closing, I began with a Gaelic prayer. I would like to close with a prayer by an American poet, a poem by an American poet, and I'd like to share it as a prayer for Irish Americans and anyone celebrating the true meaning of St. Patrick's Day. The poem is called Old Ireland. Let us pray. Far hence, amid an isle of wondrous beauty, crouching over a grave, an ancient, sorrowful mother, once a queen, now lean and tattered, seated on the ground, her old white hair drooping disheveled round her shoulders, at her feet fallen an unused royal harp, long silent, she too long silent, mourning her shrouded hope and air, of all the earth her heart most full of sorrow because most full of love. Yet a word, ancient mother, you need crouch there no longer on the cold ground with forehead between your knees. Oh, you need not sit there veiled in your old white hair so disheveled. For know you the one you mourn is not in that grave. It was an illusion. The son you love was not really dead. The Lord is not dead. He is risen again, young and strong in another country. Even while you wept there by your fallen harp by the grave, what you wept for was translated, passed from the grave. The winds favored and the sea sailed it. And now, with rosy cheeks and new blood, moves today in a new country. Amen.